You believe we co-evolved with plants to borrow their medicines to keep us healthy. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. Well, like guinea pigs don't make vitamin C. Humans don't make vitamin C. Many other species of animals do. We don't make it because we're lazy. Our biology, don't want to do anything that we don't have to do with our biology to conserve energy. So we co-evolved with plants to use their compounds as medicines to help regulate our biology. And animals do this. If you see a wild animal or a cow that's pasture raised, they will graze on a few major food crops, but then they'll sample maybe 100 other crops, plants, to actually activate medicinal properties in those plants for themselves. They don't know that, but they kind of intuitively figure this out and keep themselves healthy, which is quite interesting. And so the same thing with humans. We've co-evolved with these plants, and over 800 species of plants as hunter-gatherers that contain these rich phytochemical compounds that we now are understanding that maybe we thought there were 25,000. There may be 1 million of these things in plants. And we're starting to catalog them and understand their mechanisms of action, how they work. When we say food is medicine, that's what we mean. We mean inside the food we're eating, there are medicinal compounds that our body uses to activate various pathways. For example, one of the key findings, for example, around longevity was the activation of sirtuins. Sirtuins is one of the 4 longevity switches that are in the hallmark of aging called deregulated nutrient sensing, meaning how do we sense our nutrition environment and how do we regulate different processes based on whether we're eating the wrong stuff or the right stuff. And so resveratrol, which comes from grapes, actually works on sirtuins to activate sirtuins, which kicks in this whole system of DNA repair and improving insulin sensitivity and mitochondrial function and helping to reduce inflammation. And it's a really amazing thing that happens when you properly regulate sirtuins. Well, resveratrol is a plant compound that is acting on that pathway, for example. Doesn't mean you should be drinking red wine. I want to be careful with that because we now know that alcohol is actually, even in lower amounts than we thought, can be harmful and increase risk of cancer, and is definitely not a health promoting activity. It's fine to do once in a while as a recreational fun thing to do, but it's not something you want to do every day. And I think the compounds in the red grapes actually do act on this pathway. So that's one example.
Yeah. But then also, I think we have to acknowledge that I'm guessing in these blue zones where you went to, that people are drinking as well, right?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are. They're having a glass of wine here and there. But, we have to understand that there is a phenomena in science called the healthy user effect. And this means that we can get kind of confused in studies where we say, oh, it seems like people drinking alcohol live longer, or they do this or that. It may be the other things they're doing, right? If we're told that, having a glass of wine is good for you, then maybe the people who are drinking the wine are engaging in other healthy behaviors, right? They're exercising, they're eating more fruits and vegetables, they're not smoking. So we have to be careful of these biases that are inherent in studying people, where we thought, for example, that hormones were protective for women against heart disease and cancer and stroke and dementia because of a population study where they found, women who seemed to take hormones had less of these problems. Well, it was because these women were healthier as a group because they went to the doctor more, they paid more attention to their health, they exercised more, they didn't smoke, they ate more fruits and vegetables. That's why they had less heart disease, cancer, stroke, and dementia. And when they did a randomized controlled trial called the Women's Health Initiative, it was $1 billion study, 160,000 women. They literally had to stop the trial partway through because so many women were dying who were taking the hormones. It's because of the bias in the first study that was called the healthy user effect. And that's what's going on when you look at some of the data. Well, yes, the people in the blue zones drink a little wine, but what else did they do? They weren't exposed to environmental toxins. They had really no chronic stresses. They had deep sense of meaning, purpose, and community. They ate foods that were original, like almost heirloom foods, a lot of wild foods they eat in Nicaria. They had animal foods, but they had animals that were eating all these wild plants that had phytochemicals in them. They had natural exercise that they did as part of their life. So what was it? Was it the alcohol or was it all this other stuff?
Yeah. Thanks for explaining that. I was just bringing that up to stimulate conversation because I think one of the problems when we look at these blue zones is that we, as I've already mentioned, we take these things in isolation, and it's the totality of their experience that leads to it. And we're trying to learn principles. And also the truth is, like in the West, most people, certainly if I speak about the patient population I have seen, most people are consuming alcohol to de-stress, right? So it's a way of mitigating chronic levels of high stress. So I imagine in the blue zones, it's a very different relationship with that alcohol. It's not to de-stress. Maybe it's a small amount to connect, right?
And maybe it's also true, and maybe it's also different. Like in Icaria, they made wine according to their ancient methods. They kind of smushed it with their feet. The grapes were grown in tough soils, so they were much higher in phytochemicals. They didn't have any sulfites. They kind of fermented them in these clay pots underneath the soil, and sometimes it didn't work out, and they were all organic. There were no pesticides. So who knows? It was quite different. I actually drank the wine in Icaria, and I was like, normally wine makes me feel like crap. I just get brain fog and feel kind of off. And I drank this wine. I felt great. I was like, wow, this is really different. But it's not wine that you can actually even take home with you because, they can't ship it. They can't really bottle it. It's really served fresh. It's very different.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to be clear, none of us are, as medical doctors, are promoting alcohol consumption. We're just having a conversation about how these things may influence health and longevity.
Listen, if you want to climb 5 miles on a rocky mountain every day, if you want to sleep 8-9 hours, if you want to have no chronic stress, be exposed to no toxins, have a deep sense of community, meaning and purpose, and eat like only heirloom traditional foods that are completely unprocessed, you probably can have a glass of wine. It's not going to hurt you. So I think just be careful of all the other things. Yeah.
Mark, coming back to nutrition, it's a very confusing topic for many people, right? And I'm always conscious that I never want to leave people at the end of these podcasts more confused. And I think sometimes that does happen because you speak to someone who may have a certain food philosophy and you speak to someone else with another food philosophy, and they sound very knowledgeable and they quote research to support their point of view. And so in the interest of moving this forward for people, right, let's just go through what everyone can agree on. We started off this conversation talking about reducing ultra-processed foods. I don't think there's many people in this space who would disagree with that, right?
No, I don't. I think that's a universally accepted thing that we should. And that sugar and starch in general are really not great for you. I think most people also agree about that.
Excess sugar, for sure. I think most people can agree with. We're eating way more than we used to, and reducing it, eliminating, I think, is pretty hard for most people in the current environment. But reducing
unless you're type 2 diabetic and you're really overweight, and your metabolism is so screwed up, those people I think do probably need to be on an extremely restricted carbohydrate diet. But once you're metabolically healthy, you can eat more and be more resilient, and that's the goal.
So then the third thing, I think we discussed protein. Now, yes, it's controversial. And it is, as you even admit in your book, it is confusing for people. There's a line where you actually say that, so you understand the confusion. But the ProTage study, which was very thorough, does seem to support increased protein intake to help us prevent sarcopenia, particularly as we get older. And I think you've very eloquently explained your view is that actually it's easy with animal protein, but if you want to do it with plant protein, you can do it. You're going to need to supplement. You may need to make sure you're hitting that 2.5 grams of leucine. So I think, again, broad agreement there, I would say. Would you agree with that?
I agree. And I agree. In terms of plant proteins, you have to make sure that you add extra amino acids or that they're added already to the plant protein. And you have to probably take a plant protein powder, which is pea protein or other forms of protein that may be, pumpkin seed. There's good protein powders out there, but they're not going to be sufficient on their own unless they have added amino acids to bring the leucine content up to 2.5 grams per serving, which is, about 30 plus grams.
Okay, great. And then let's move on to a term that you have said on numerous occasions in this conversation, previous podcast conversations, which is phytochemicals or phytonutrients, right? And these are compounds that are found within plants. Now, I think there's broad consensus that phytonutrients are probably helpful for us, right? I don't think there are a couple of people I follow online.
The carnivore community thinks those are toxins in plants, but I don't quite agree. They technically, they kind of are, right? The phytochemicals in plants are the plant's defense systems. But as I said, a little bit of stress, a little bit of phytochemical hormesis actually helps our own biology work better.
Yeah. So, and I think another, somewhere that I think people get confused with phytochemicals is that they don't understand the way in which it works in the body. They sort of break it down into the constituents. Like they'll look at a food and go, well, how much fiber, how much protein, how much fat, how many carbs. If you go to the supermarket, you don't see the phytonutrient numbers on the back, right? But it's
you should.
Well, yeah, and maybe that's the way we'll move at some point in the future. But I wonder if you could just really expand on that. Why are phytonutrients so important in your view? And we need to move beyond this kind of fat, protein, carb model to really understand that, because it's to do with signaling our genes, isn't it?
Totally. I mean, I think the thing that we've missed is that, nutrition, we look at a reductionist view, what is needed: amino acids, fatty acids, carbohydrates, some vitamins and minerals. And it turns out that, you can give people nutrition through an intravenous tube, which contains all these elements. But what is missing is a lot of the stuff that actually really is necessary for health, which are these things that were not considered essential nutrients, but that I consider essential. They're not necessarily going to give you a deficiency disease if you don't eat them. But if you don't eat them over a long period of time, chronic disease will accelerate and you won't protect yourself against all these ravages of aging. And I think this is such an important concept for people to understand, that these are medicines in food. And I have a whole chart in the book about how different compounds in food, whether it's certain classes of foods like onions and garlic, which have quercetin, or other foods like the broccoli family that has glucoferrin, which is important for longevity, or whether it's certain, phytochemicals in green tea like catechins that activate different pathways, or the mushrooms that have polysaccharides that regulate immunity. I go through all the different foods that we can choose from the grocery store, what I call the pharmacy, Pharmacy, and we can use those foods as a part of our daily consumption to activate some of these longevity pathways and switches. So it's not hard to do, but it's important that we consider that these compounds are really essential for us if we want to have vibrant health.
You mentioned the carnivore community, which is growing. And I think it's something that, doctors like ourselves should be talking about, because a lot of people are saying, I've tried everything. And since I went carnivore, so for people who are not familiar, basically pretty much an all meat diet is the way I think many people practice it. And they are reporting all kinds of improvments, joint pain, skin, weight loss, vitality, vibrancy, right?
Sure.
So I want to, with sensitivity and compassion, sort of tease this out a little bit, because on one hand, and this is my view with any patient, you cannot blame anyone for doing something where they've made a change and they feel better, especially when what they tried before did not make them feel good.
Agreed,
right?
100%.
So what do you think is going on for people in that community? Obviously, you don't know every single patient there. And where does the phytochemical story come in for those people, would you say?
Yeah. So, the truth is that there are therapeutic diets that can be applied in different patients that need different things. So do I think everybody should be on a keto diet? No. Do I think it's therapeutic diet that can be very effective for some people? Absolutely. Do I think carnivore diet is the diet we should all be on? No. Do I think it can be effective for certain people? Yes. And part of it is not the meat that they're eating, it's what they're not eating, right? They're not eating sugar. They're not eating processed food. They're not having gluten. They're typically not having dairy. They're not having any of the typical processed inflammatory foods that are causing so many of the symptoms. So, for example, if you get off grains and beans, you're removing a lot of things that potentially are bothering people's gut. And not that grains and beans are bad, but for certain people, they are, right? So if you have an autoimmune disease, if you have leaky gut, if you have various inflammatory problems, it may be a real factor. So I often will put people on a more restricted diet in order to reset their biology and see what's working and what's not. And we call that in functional medicine an elimination diet. So a carnivore diet, in a sense, is a very extreme elimination diet with one basic food group. Now, the truth is that, you can get phytochemicals from animal foods if you eat regeneratively raised animals or wild animals. In Ikaria and Sardinia, they were taking their goats and sheep and they were taking them to eat all these different wild plants at different times of the year because they knew, not because it had phytochemicals, they knew it would taste better if it had this plant or that plant at this time of the year, that the milk and the meat would taste better, the cheese would taste better. Flavor always follows phytochemical richness in our food. So where our flavor comes from, other than the additives, is from the colorful compounds in the food, like a ripe tomato or, a nice juicy peach in the summer, or something that is from, asparagus just picked from the garden tastes way different than asparagus you buy in the store. These are because of the phytochemicals in them. But when you are eating a carnivore diet, you're eliminating most of the things, but you are maybe getting some phytochemicals in the food. You're also getting, fatty acids. And if you're eating the right kinds of meat, you're getting some omega-3s. You're getting lots of nutrients, zinc. You have to probably eat organ meats to get all the vitamins that you need. So there's some tricks to it. But I think that it is a pretty interesting way of thinking about treating lots of different conditions that are inflammatory. And I'm not opposed to it, but I don't think it's a long-term strategy. And when you look at our biological needs, we need small amounts of essential fatty acids, in the gram level. There is no biological requirement for carbohydrate, but there is a large requirement for the macronutrient protein. It's the only one for which there's a large requirement as part of our diet. So I think people can do fine on that. I worry long-term, but it's about looking at the numbers. What does your numbers look like? I just saw a patient the other day who was on it and their cholesterol went crazy. So there may be individual responses that are quite different, even to the same diet. And I think that's what people need to understand. There's no one size fits all. There's not, vegan diet's great for everybody or carnivore diet's great for everybody. It's really about what's great for you, what works for you. And that's, as a physician, what my interest is not in, research studies with thousands of people. It's like, what is happening to that person in front of me? And let's do what we call an N of one experiment. Let's try whatever you want to try, or let's try what I think might be best based on the research. And let's measure again and how you do.
Yeah.
If you get better, great. If you get worse, let's change our strategy.
Yeah, I think that was a beautiful breakdown and sort of very similar to my view on it, which is it's a phenomenal elimination diet. The case study of psoriatic arthritis, which you mentioned earlier on in this conversation, again, the principle was you put that patient on a very strict elimination diet to help them because they were sick. And, maybe a year down the line, 6 months down the line, as they rebuild their body, they rebuild their gut lining, potentially they can start to reintroduce things, right? We see that all the time. And I guess, phytochemicals aren't just in your broccoli and your asparagus. Green tea, black tea, right? The herbs that you might put on the cooking, right? They all contain these, turmeric, curcumin, all this sort of stuff. Do you know what I mean? There's other ways people can get that, even if they are on quite a restrictive diet.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, totally.
Yeah. Mark, there's a point there, as you mentioned, the elimination diets, and I'd really welcome your thoughts on this. These days, for most people, is it more important to focus on what to bring into your diet, or is it more important to focus on what to take out of it?
That's a great question. I think, I think it's both. You have to add in all the good stuff and you have to take out the bad stuff. If you're eating, 3 cups of broccoli a day, but having 3 Coca-Colas, I don't think it's going to do the same thing as if you get rid of the Coca-Colas and eat, more whole foods. So I think we do need to get rid of stuff, and we also need to add stuff. So they're both really important. I think the key is trying to include more and more of the things that are good for you and slowly eliminate things that are bad for you. And I think people can get there. Now, what I often recommend, because if you do the incremental approach, you might not see the benefits as fast, is a short-term 10-day reset. And I call it the 10-day detox diet. I've written a book about it. It's sort of highlighted in a little bit in the book about how to do that. But the key is when you kind of remove all the bad stuff, potentially bad stuff, because it may not be bad, right? Gluten may not be bad for everybody. But if you remove all the stuff that potentially is bad for 10 days, your body will get the chance to reset. And what I've seen by doing that there's a 70% reduction in all symptoms from all diseases in 10 days. That's migraines, irritable bowel, depression, arthritis, whatever it is, gets better in 10 days. Now, if it doesn't get better, maybe something else is going on. Maybe you have Lyme disease or mercury poisoning or something else causing it. But most of the time, a lot of the ailments that we're suffering from are because of what we're eating, and a short-term reset can be extremely powerful. So you can do an incremental approach if you want, but I encourage people to do a reset, because then you go, oh, shoot, I didn't realize how much food was affecting how I feel. Yeah. And how much better I can feel in so few days. It's not like months or years of doing this to see a result. It's literally days.
If you enjoyed that clip, here's another powerful clip that I think you are really going to enjoy.